All right. So who is here at NDC for the first time? So many new faces. That's exciting. Well, welcome. I hope you are having a wonderful conference so far. This is definitely one of my favorite organizations that does really, really fantastic conferences. You might see a lot of people running around in pink shirts. Those are the volunteers who are helping this run, so make sure and show them some love. A lot of work goes into putting a conference of this magnitude on, a lot of work that you may not be aware of. So definitely say thank you to the volunteers, say thank you to the nice people at the front desks doing check-in, show them some love. In addition, make sure you're stopping by the sponsor booths, talking to them, finding out what's going on. Great sponsors are why we can have great events like this, why we can keep ticket prices reasonable, so be sure to show everybody some love. Hopefully you can tell by the slides, we're going to talk about working remote. If you're not in the right room, I apologize. If you came from my jams, sorry, not sorry. So let's go ahead and get started. A little bit about me. My name is Jennifer Wadella. You can follow me at @OMG@Sveti on Twitter. I do warn people this time of year, Bachelor, a trashy American reality TV show is in season. I get drunk and live tweet on Monday nights. This is your one warning if you choose to follow me. I make no apologies for those kind of tweets. But 9 to 5, I am a remote software engineer. I lead Angular consulting at a remote first company in the US. Which allows me to travel, do all sorts of stuff. I run a nonprofit back home to help get more women in tech and do a lot of speaking all over the world, which pairs very nicely with working remote. So I can, get done with this talk and go have a couple client meetings from wherever I am in the world as long as I have Wi-Fi. And then I do have to say I'm from Kansas City, so this is a map of the United States, because everybody's like, where are you from? And I say Kansas City, and they're like, where's that? So that star is where I'm from, and our football team has made it to the Super Bowl for the first time in 50 years, which is why I've got to rep some Chiefs pride. We're very, very excited about that. So to get into it, how many people are working remote right now? Okay, how many people are interested in working remote? Okay, how many people are working remote and feeling like they're failing miserably at working remote? This is a shame-free room for the next hour, by the way, whenever we do hand raising. So a lot of people are really interested, but remote work is not necessarily for everyone, and so we're going to talk about a couple things today. This talk is not me going to be telling you for 60 minutes why remote working is the best thing ever and why everybody should do it, even though I get to travel and go cool places in the way I work remote. We'll talk a little bit about how great it is, but the goal for the talk is really, first of all, figuring out if you are working at a company, or maybe you're considering working at a company. Are they going to be set up for remote work so you can be successful? Is remote work the right fit for you? Do you have the personality? Do you have the traits? Do you have the attributes that can make you successful in this kind of role? And then if you do are just hell-bent on working remote, we'll talk through some strategies that will help you hopefully be a more effective remote worker. And then the last thing I do like to talk about there are a couple ways if you are looking for a remote job or something like that, there are websites and resources that I'm going to give you to talk through if you're like, all right, I'm inspired after this talk, it's going to be amazing, I'm going to go work remote now, here's how to start applying for those jobs. So the most important thing we need to talk about, though, is with remote work, will that company be good at supporting you? Are they good at supporting remote workers? Can they even do it in the first place? Because you can only be as successful as your environment will allow. And you may have been in a job before, and you may have had a less than awesome boss, and it did not matter how hard you killed it, how good your code was. If you don't have a supportive manager, you cannot do enough good in the world. And this is very much magnified in remote work, so that's worth being aware of. So I have kind of this remote company checklist. I've worked at, I think, 4 remote companies now, interviewed at a lot of them, and there are a lot of things that I started to look for and kind of put together this checklist of, all right, is this company going to have an environment that allows me to be successful? So number 1 is having some sort of onboarding process. Number 2 is having meetings that are built to be inclusive of remote workers. You're going to run into a couple types of scenarios. You'll be at companies that are remote first, meaning the entire team is distributed, everybody is remote, and this is less of a concern for them. But then you also have a lot of companies who want to support people who work from home, or maybe give parents flex time so they can be at home and take care of their kids. And that's more important to be aware of when you're in kind of that hybrid situation, to really take a look at their meetings and the way they communicate and make sure that that's built to be inclusive of you. Having clear and always available task management. Want to make sure a remote company are effective communicators, very, very key, and that they have documentation around tribal knowledge. And have appropriate performance evaluation systems in place. Again, this is, if you want to be successful, you need to be able to have measurable benchmarks or something that you can hit that makes sense for what you're doing. And so we'll talk through a lot of these items in detail, but I will see a couple phones up. Okay. All right, so number one, let's talk about onboarding process. And this onboarding process does not need to be fancy. It does not need to be sending you a bunch of stuff that's like branded and swag and t-shirts and stickers, although we do love our stuff. That's not what you should be looking for. You should be looking for something that is more coherent and just well thought through. Onboarding, for instance, should clearly outline expectations and policies. With working remote, with distributed people, you may be working across different time zones. Does that company have a time zone that they're operating out of? What are their expectations around your working hours? Are they managing like a typical 9-to-5 culture, or are they that kind of company that's going to be okay if you're a night owl coder popping online at night? What are their policies? How do you take vacation? How do you check in with your team? All these sorts of things should be outlined in an onboarding process. You should not be having to hunt for this information. It should be clearly presented and laid out. Onboarding should also highlight any appropriate company and third-party contacts. When you're working remote, you lose that water cooler opportunity to very organically meet people, right? They can't be like, oh, go talk to Susan. She's in cubicle like X. That doesn't exist. And so you have to make sure that you have very appropriate directories laid out. You have information to get a hold of the people you need because, again, you're losing that in-person, very tactile way of interacting with other humans. And so onboarding should lay out contact information for anybody you could need to get a hold of. Key things to look for, you want to make sure leadership, what their positions are, what their roles in the company are. If there are project managers or people that you're going to be interfacing with a lot. HR, what happens if you get locked out of your computer? Do they have some sort of support team in place that you'll need to be getting a hold of? Do they work with any third-party vendors that you're going to need to contact for in case something goes down or any partnerships that you need to be aware of? So these are kind of key items. So when you're looking at a company, ask them about their onboarding process and make sure they've really thought through these things. Onboarding should also include equipment specs. I've seen a lot of different approaches. Some places will buy you a new computer according to your specs. Maybe they'll give you an allotted budget if you need to upgrade your chair or a monitor or something like that. But this is something to think about. And if you have your working preferences for your setup in your office and working remote, it's a good idea to make sure that what this company is going to offer you is laid out in that onboarding process so you can make your plans to be successful. Onboarding should also provide access to necessary communication tools. So the nonprofit I run back home, we are a volunteer-run organization, and there's about 60 of us running day-to-day events. And because we're volunteer only, we very much have a remote approach to our work. And so we have an entire onboarding process where we're going to bring somebody on our team. Okay, do they have their Google account created under our account? Yes. Okay, are they added to the appropriate calendars so they're going to see their meetings? Do they have Slack access to our private leadership channels? Do they have Google Drive access to the folders they should be able to have? And so these are things that will really eat away your day if the company has not thought through their process and making sure you get all the information you need. And I'm not saying that this doesn't apply to in-person companies as well, but it's even more important to be aware and be looking for these things when working remote. So next big bullet point is having meetings built to be inclusive of remote workers. So many years ago, I worked at a marketing agency, and we had this amazing business analyst / project manager. She was just like that person that was so good at what she did, and the company did not want to let her go. And she moved to Chicago, I believe, when we were in Kansas City. And so one of the things they did to support her was they bought this robot. And so it's like this little wheel thing, and there's this like extendable arm, and there's an iPad attached to it. And what she would do is remote into this, and she could literally drive around the building and come into meetings with us. And it was great one time because we had totally forgotten that she was supposed to be in a meeting because we were being a bad remote working company. And so we're in this like little fishbowl thing, right? And we're in there with this closed room. And so we're talking to each other, and then we just slowly see this this like little iPad like robot creeping up the window, and we're like, oh no, we forgot to bring Tisha into the meeting. So it was a lot of fun. And then like Halloween, she was having fun. Like the people brought their kids in and was getting like chased by this little dinosaur. So being aware of what it's like for remote workers who might not be there in person and making sure that they have ways to access, especially in an in-person environment like this, is really, really key. So meetings, sorry, getting a little jumpy here, should always be on the calendar. One of the huge struggles with a hybrid remote organization is if they do kind of those like out smoking a cigarette meetings where they just pass each other in the hallway. Oh, that's a great idea. Let's have a meeting. It's very easy to forget about the people who are remote, and all of a sudden you're missing information, you're missing context, you're not getting these key pieces of information that happen very organically. So if you're gonna do a meeting, it needs to be on the calendar. You need to make sure the appropriate people are on the calendar. These are, again, good questions to ask when talking to remote companies. Hey, what is your meeting scheduling looking like? And especially if you are at your desk working remote. One of the things that I love is being able to go to the grocery store at really random times in the afternoon when nobody's going to be there. And so it's important for me that my company knows, okay, there might be this weird like 30-minute window where I'm not available if a meeting gets put on the calendar like that. So be aware of meetings being on the calendars, how they're scheduling it, and the culture around that. Meetings should also always include the necessary join links, numbers, access codes to call in. So if you're using Google Hangouts, make sure that link is included and that you're not having to do that frantic emailing, getting everybody on the invite list, or if it's Zoom, or if there's a kind of static Zoom link that everybody knows to join, or special access codes. Make sure that they have that information readily available, or if you're managing this team, that information is distributed in those kind of meetings. Meetings should also be scheduled in consideration of workers in time zones. And I say this because I'm a hangry bitch when it gets to be lunchtime. If you schedule a meeting during my lunch hour, I will be very, very angry about it. And that's something that it's really easy to forget or not think about when you're in your time zone and you know how your workflow is. But if you know that you're communicating with a different team, be aware of those considerations. One of the clients I work for is 2 hours behind in the US, so they're on the West Coast. And so a lot of what I do is I really manage my schedule with them. I'm like, these are my working hours. Let's make sure meetings are scheduled in there. When I'm traveling overseas, I let them know what hours I'm working in. So that way we're always considerate of each other and figuring out where our day is in a certain time zone. Okay, number 3, have a clear and always available task management system. There's nothing more frustrating than being a remote worker and your office is quiet and you're like, I'm gonna write so much code today, and you cannot get access to whatever things you're supposed to be working on, and it's really, really frustrating. The key here is a remote worker is you want to be able to get online anywhere, anytime you have internet access, any time of day, and make sure that you're able to see exactly what you should be working on, update status, and have any documentation needed for your job. This has to be like a very big part of core values for remote working. This is not a task management system. I'm sorry, y'all, like screw your Post-its, they are not helpful. This needs to be translated into an online forum where people can see and know what's going on. And I know this is fun and it's like the startup bro kind of thing, but it's not conducive to a remote working environment. I'm sorry, like Trello is a great tool. I know you're gonna groan at me, but Jira, you could use Jira. There needs to be some sort of online task management system that anybody can access anywhere in the world, any time of day, not this. I have seen this before, and that would be my advice to you is if you ask about like how they do their sprint planning or how they do their features or how you pick up new work, and they're like, oh, well, we have Post-its. Nah, sweetie, run the other way. You are not gonna be successful at that remote place. So there are plenty of tools, again, for collaboration. GitHub has actually started to push out a lot of really great kind of to-do trackings and things like that for management workflow. Again, Trello, I feel like a lot of people lean towards. Jira, love, hate it, it works. But it does not matter. There just needs to be some sort of tool that meets these criteria. You need to be able to work like this. Angry GIF guy. All right, let's talk about tasks, because it's one thing to, all right, we've got all our tasks in one place. First, they need to have clearly outlined requirements. Again, we're dealing with a distributed team, so what happens if you're working on a ticket and you're really unclear as to some functionality, but the BA is a completely different time zone, and they're the only person you can ask because the requirements aren't outlined clearly enough. This is where you're going to waste time and be ineffective as a remote worker. So making sure that class tasks are clearly outlined with their requirements is really, really key for your productivity. If there are any necessary steps for completion, if there's deployment processes to be done, if you've got, linting tools set up, if you are, doing some sort of testing for accessibility or something like that, make sure all of the tasks are outlined with their steps for completion and what you need to do to be able to sign off on the work you've done. Tasks must also have priorities or due dates. One of the great things about working remote is it allows this really vast level of autonomy. But you cannot be an autonomous worker if you're not aware of priorities, tasks, deadlines in order to construct your workflow around getting your actual job done. So making sure these things for tasks is really important. All right, let's talk about being effective communicators. Because communication is pretty much at the crux of every problem. We can pride ourselves and say, oh, it's all about the code. If we write clean code, like everything will be fine, but I'm sorry, that's bullshit. What it's really about is making sure that we're communicating clearly with each other. You can write the best code in the world and it is not gonna matter if the work you're supposed to be doing isn't communicated well to you or you're not communicating your status of that work back. And the thing with remote is if a company sucks at communicating in person, they're gonna be way worse at communicating remotely. They are not going to be conscious, they're not going to be aware of what you need as a remote worker, and it's going to be bad news bears for everybody. So if you notice some weirdness, if you're interviewing with a company in person and wanting to go remote and you notice they're not doing a very good job even in person, remote is going to be a dumpster fire. So things to be looking out for communication-wise. How is company-wide information relayed? I have this love-hate relationship with Slack. You'll hear me rant about it a lot. And I really hate when people think they can just put something important in a Slack general channel and think that that's an appropriate way to communicate something out to everybody in the company. Once it goes past the fold, y'all, that shit might as well no longer exist. It's not gonna be there anymore. So Slack is not an appropriate tool for relaying really important company-wide information. For instance, with my nonprofit, we do have a lot of conversations in Slack, but if there are important deadlines, if there are big changes with sponsorship, anything like that, that goes out in an email to the entire team. And emails suck, I'm sorry, but they are a very important tool. They take forever to write, but they are a good mechanism for delivering company-wide information. So look at culture and the tools they're using and figure out how that is. What are the tools used for daily communication? A lot of us have moved to Slack, but I did work at a remote company that had Trillion that moved to Slack, but also did a lot of emailing and also had like a random forum, and they just had too many communication channels, and so that was really frustrating as well. So ask questions about what tools they're using to communicate, figure out if that works for you. If there are goals or progress or changes, or maybe there's something, you've gotten user feedback and all of a sudden we're shifting priorities of what we're working on, how are you gonna get that information? How is this company currently communicating those changes, and are they aware? Do they realize that they need to be communicating those kind of things that are going to be really important to you doing your job autonomously? And finally, what if you have a blocker? Like, what if you really need information and this person is away from their desk or they're in a different time zone? How are those situations handled? Is there a backup individual that you need to be aware of? All these really, really key things to look for and be watching for when exploring if a company is going to be able to support you remotely. One-on-ones are a big deal, especially remote. Again, we're missing that water cooler connection, right? We're missing that very organic in-person opportunity to get to know people. And so one-on-ones are really, really important in remote companies. The current job I'm at, I love what they did for their process. They had a really good onboarding process, but they assigned me a buddy. And so this is a person who was gonna help answer my questions if there was something that wasn't documented in their process well enough. Somebody who would help me know company culture, or if I had questions about maybe I should do this or that kind of thing. And so this buddy system was this really great, brilliant way to onboard me into the company and handle communication in a way where anything that wasn't covered in documentation, I was able to get the information I need. I've been at the company well over a year now, and he and I actually still have one-on-ones just because we ended up being really good friends, and we'll chat, and we're always on different clients and stuff, and so it's just kind of good to catch up and have fun. So one-on-one's a really big deal to get to know your team members. You're gonna have to make more of an effort in remote scenarios because, again, you're missing that really organic way that you would normally be able to meet and spend time with people and get to know them. All right, documentation around tribal knowledge, because again, we're trying to be as autonomous as possible, and that means documentation. And we all know how much we love writing documentation. I hope some of you are feeling very attacked by this comic right now. Can you see that? Is that big enough? No? Okay. So for the people in the back, I wonder if I can zoom this in without like completely wrecking my, no, I cannot. Okay, so for the people in the back, the guy's getting ready to leave for vacation, and the one guy's like, hey, did you document your code? And he's like, yeah, I did. And then there's a function that says save user token, and then in the comments it says saves token of the user. So haha, right? Yeah. There needs to be some semblance of documentation around tribal knowledge. And when you look at code comments like this, well, no shit, that's what that function does, right? But sometimes we need to know the why, especially if there's a weird edge case or scenario, or, well, the client didn't want to pay for us to do the right way, so I hacked it together this way. That's the kind of knowledge that we need to make sure that other people are aware of. Updating your readmes for how you deploy your app, really good for tribal knowledge. So I'm gonna hate on Slack again because Slack does not equal documentation, okay? Slack does not equal documentation. And once more, for all the folks in the back, Slack does not equal documentation. If this is your idea of documentation, you are not going to be a good remote worker. If your company's idea of documentation is something written in Slack, that is not going to be good for remote workers. So just cannot harp on that enough. Slack is not documentation. The things that there need to be documentation around: environment setup. You know, what do you need? Do you need VPN? Do you need some sort of credentials? Something like that. Are you in some sort of like Docker environment? You know, what are the things that you need to be aware of to even get your environment up and running? I work in consulting, and so a big thing that we worry about is when we're going on to new clients and sometimes switching out consultants, having this environment set up documentation is really, really important for us to be able to jump in and be really effective on a project immediately. So documentation around environment setup, any build processes that you need to be aware of. I live in Angular land, and so most of our stuff, most of the time, is really consistent thanks to Angular CLI, but every so often you'll jump into a weird legacy code project and you're like, there's not a package.json, what do I do now? Like, how do I make this code run? I have no idea. So documentation around build processes. Also testing, whatever their testing setup, whatever their tools are. Do they have Bamboo? Are you gonna need to log in to see what's happened when your build has failed? Something like that. What happens if it's just like a random test error that's not actually valid and you need to re-trigger that build? How do you make that happen? What does deployment look like? Is there a deployment process, or do you have to ping somebody on the dev team who is like the god of all deployment and won't let anybody touch things, and you have to like sweet talk him just the right way for him to actually deploy your build for you? These are real world scenarios, by the way. So making sure documentation around deployment is there, as well as any company code standards. You know, we have the help of linters these days, but a lot of times people will just be set in their ways, and if that information is not communicated to you, it can lead to some unpleasant situations in code reviews that could be avoided if we just had a little bit better documentation. And finally, what happens when there are migrations or environment changes or any sort of weird things? And this is where Slack is the big culprit, because I feel like people will put this information in Slack and you're dealing with a million other things. You've got like 6 tickets on your to-do list right now. You're already debugging this random production issue. And so I'm sorry, I missed a message about migration 2 days ago in Slack. I'm sorry, I'm not good enough to comprehend that. So anything big that's affecting the team as a whole for the way they're writing code or the way they're dealing with their environments needs to be documented and not in Slack. Again, our goal here for being really successful remote working is having the ability to be completely autonomous. We want to be as autonomous as possible. And so this is the thing you should be thinking about when you're talking to potential employers. All right, do they have this set up so I can do all these things without necessarily having to harass a bunch of people across different time zones and different things? Can I do the work I need to do when I'm able to do it? Okay. have appropriate performance evaluation systems in place. And y'all really need to pay attention to this because I've been burned by this many, many times before. So this is a bigger deal for companies that are transitioning to remote for the first time or maybe supporting remote workers. There's this perception that because your butt is in a chair in front of a computer screen, you are being productive. That may be bullshit because you may be like alt-tapping between Reddit, like while they're not looking in between your code, but as far as they're concerned, your butt is in a chair, therefore you are being productive. That metric, that crutch, goes out the window in remote environments. And if the management team is not aware of that, that can really, really burn you. And this is a situation where, okay, maybe you ducked out to the grocery store because it was really easy and your boss pings you and you don't respond within 30 seconds and all of a sudden you're a shitty employee because you weren't there to respond to that message. So you need to look at the way they're going to evaluate your performance and what metrics they have in place to make sure that you're aware of those and can be successful and that they're not bullshit. This image here where it's the CEO and is looking at the number of times a ticket has been reopened and saying, is this a valid tracking measure to judge my developers on? Was me 3 jobs ago where a non-technical CEO of a completely remote company just had no way to validate the work we were doing. So this is the metric that was decided on to evaluate the developers, was how many times a ticket got reopened. Didn't matter if it was a bug, didn't matter if it wasn't well documented in the first place, doesn't mean if I accidentally clicked the wrong button in Jira. That was the evaluation metric. And you can guess how well that went. Let's just say I quit before she sacked about 30 of a 36 developer dev team. Yeah, it was like, shit was crazy. But in technology, in all companies, leadership does not always perform at the standards that we would hope in a perfect world. So if you want to be successful remote, you have to cover your ass. You have to be aware of the way they're going to evaluate you and figure out if you can be successful within that. So things you want to look for: who's actually setting the evaluation metrics? Is it non-technical leadership that literally thinks you press an easy button and that's how the internet happens and that's what code is? Because they're not going to have a really good picture of how to evaluate your efficacy as a developer. Their technical expertise is really going to matter. If code is taking longer to ship because you're running into a bunch of issues, are they going to understand that? Can you explain that? Can you advocate for your team and make them aware of why certain things are happening? What metrics are currently in place? Like, what are they basing reviews off of? Are they doing peer feedback? Is it based off of like executable items? Or is it a situation where they're so scattered that they're going to be constantly pushing the goalpost and you're going to be running, trying to meet expectations as they're changing on the fly? That is a quick way to get to burnout, y'all. How is your actual performance judged? Like, are they going to look at the lines of code you wrote? Is it going to be, hey, as long as I'm getting my tickets delivered on time? Is it whether the user is actually liking the product you're building? Like, how are they looking at performance? How are they making those judgments? Basically, you want to understand, how do you prove that you're worth your paycheck? What boxes do you need to tick, or what do you need to be aware of to say, hey, I'm here, I'm working, I'm a remote worker, please keep giving me money for what I'm doing for you. I saw this tweet the other day and I asked Gene if I could use it because it was pretty good. Because again, remote is so hot right now, right? Everybody wants to do it, but not everybody can do it very, very well. So if you have a company and their idea of working remote is everybody sitting in a Google Hangout all day, run the other direction. That is not a company that you will be successful at. Because again, you don't realize it, but a lot of managers, a lot of leadership are, again, relying on this crutch of this butt-in-seat metric. And when they can't see your butt in a seat, they don't know what you're doing. So make sure that you're aware of how you're perceived and what your control is in that scenario. So, big picture of everything we talked about through this remote checklist. You can only be as successful as your environment will allow. You can be the best worker, you can be the best coder, you can be the best programmer, but if your environment isn't set up to allow you to be successful, none of that is going to matter. Companies that aren't good at this in person are going to have all of their failures magnified immensely in a remote situation. It's the truth. Okay, so let's talk about if remote working is the right fit for you. So whether you're already in a job or you really want to make this change, you think it's going to work for your lifestyle, it's going to work for your career goals, will it actually be the right fit for you? And so this is my starting flow chart. and I'm very adamant about this. If this is your first programming job, do not work remote. Cannot say that enough. If this is not your first job, you've been in your career path for a while, maybe you should work remote. So this is my starting flow chart. All right, so let's talk about your first job as a programmer, because there's a lot of information that you'll just miss out on without being side by side with another person. There's so much context in programming that even as much content as we put out there with the blog articles that we write and the YouTube videos that we post, it's almost second nature to those presenters, and sometimes they're gonna miss things in documentation that's really hard to pick up if you're not physically in person with somebody at their computer. A great instance of this is, let's say you're learning to use command line for the first time. And I grew up in the generation of web developers where we were designers, and then Node came in, and then all of a sudden we've gone from just doing web page shit to having to build out full JavaScript applications and start to move to the command line to take advantage of some really important tools. That's a huge learning gap. And a lot of times you'll be reading tutorials and they have this sense that their reader just has knowledge. They're not gonna say, oh, well, you need to create this directory and then you need to CD into it. And so that's a small example of really important context that you might miss out on in a non-remote position. We're getting better with screen sharing tools and things like that, but I don't think that as a technical workforce society, we are quite to the point that in your first job, you could get the context and help you need in a remote environment versus in-person. So that in-person programming is huge. It's hard to learn without really visual cues that you're gonna be seeing or watching how somebody codes. I mean, and this is kind of why we watch people on Twitch streams, right? Sometimes it's just really interesting to watch somebody, watch the way they write code, watch the way they interact with their computer. And these are things that you will miss out on if you're in a remote room, only seeing your monitor or maybe somebody via video chat. Those are really huge things that you'll miss out on. And it's also really difficult to build confidence because, again, you're not getting those organic opportunities. One of the biggest things that happened for me when I was working in an in-person job was these confidence boosters. And I remember there was one time, Backbone.js days for any JavaScript developers in the room. But this framework had just come out, and again, we're a marketing agency. A bunch of us are hybrid designers turned developers. And there were a couple really smart guys at the company, and so I would go to them for help. Well, then a couple of them got punted off to another project, and they were working on something else. And I kept down the Backbone path, and I was working, and I was pushing out code. And I remember there was this one day where one of these guys that I had really looked up to and really respected the hell out of came by my desk, and he's like, hey, I'm back on an Angular project. Can you help me do this? And I did, and I helped him out, and it was amazing. And it was such a confidence booster for me as a young developer, and I can't think of a way that scenario ever would have happened in a remote environment. So this is why I'm so adamant about young engineers, people new to the industry, not working remote for their first job. Next thing for figuring out if you can work remote is understanding how your personality plays in. How many introverts do I have in the room? Okay, extroverts, any? Any ambiverts? Oh, a couple people know that word, I love it, okay. So that self-awareness is good. So to quickly define introverts versus extroverts, I am an introvert, by the way. Yes, I can be up on the stage, but after this, I'm gonna have to hole up in my hotel room and not talk to anybody. That's how I recover energy. Introverts get energy back by being alone, by being solitary, and extroverts get energy by being around other people. And so introverts tend to do really well in remote environments because they can get whatever interaction or stimulation they need, but they get that recharge time. Versus extroverts might find themselves really, really drained in a remote scenario because they're missing that in-person contact with all those people that they really, really need. So it is important to be aware of your needs at that level, just on a personal human level, to gauge whether you can work remote or not. A huge concern I hear about are people worry if they are maybe not self-directed enough to be left alone at a desk all day long and expect to be productive. So understanding how self-directed you are, how motivated you are, is gonna be really, really important. And you may start working remote and find that you're just not able to focus in that environment, and that's okay. But these are things to be thinking about internally, be aware of yourself, be aware of your own productivity, and thinking about that when considering remote. Another really thing is being comfortable asking for help. Because in a remote environment, you cannot just turn to your neighbor and say, hey, This is not working. Can you help me out? You have to be really comfortable actively seeking people out. And if you post that shit in like a general Slack channel, it's gonna get ignored. Like everybody is too busy working on their own things, so you need to be comfortable with identifying the people who can help you through a situation or have that knowledge base that you might need and actually reach out to them and ask them for help. So if you're that person who is just too shy or is afraid to make those connections and get that information, this could be really, really hard for you because you're gonna have to work that much harder to get the information you need. Are you comfortable communicating in a primarily online culture? And I show this because another reason why I feel like I've been successful remote working is like I'm the video game generation. So I grew up playing Counter-Strike with an IRC client. I had like all my friends in AOL chat rooms, and that was very normal for me. So this idea of like throwing in emojis or like /eye roll or something like that, that's very first nature to me as a communication device because this is the culture that I have grown up in since I was probably like 13, 14 years old. And so that's very comfortable for me. But not everybody is like that, especially people who are new and transitioning into the tech industry, who didn't grow up like a fucking nerd at LAN parties like a lot of us in this room probably did. They might not be aware of Slack or the culture or the things that happen in there. With our nonprofit, for instance, we are very tech-focused, but we have a lot of non-technical people come on our team. And we're very cognizant of this, and we tell people, we use Slack for this tool for X, Y, and Z. It's good to get to know people, it's good to interact, but people who don't come from this constant online communication background, this is new territory for them, and they just don't even know or understand how to interact. So that's you. It's worth considering because, again, this is how we're going to communicate. It's going to be online. It's going to be text. A lot of times it might be video chat. But being comfortable in this sort of scenario is important for remote success. So let's talk about some strategies. If I haven't scared you away yet, how can you actually be an effective remote worker? So strategy number one is establishing and maintaining boundaries. And you cannot talk about remote work without showing this clip because it's like the best damn representation of working remote. Oh my gosh, yeah. And this is a serious concern, right? Like, he's working, he's trying to have his stuff together, and his wife's desperately trying to like wrangle the small children. But having boundaries and talking about them and maintaining them is really, really important for remote work. So maintaining consistent office hours is a really good way to start because if you have people in your life, they need to be aware of your schedule. They are not psychic. The world does not revolve around you. I'm sorry, princess, but it does not. If there are people in your life, you need to communicate with them. I will be working between this hour and this hour. I will be available for a crisis in this time period. If like the house is burning down, then yes, let me know. But setting boundaries is huge. So office hours is really, really important. So many weird things happen when you work remote. Like it'd be 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm maybe like taking a breather in between meetings, like trying to like get out a couple lines of code before the next client call starts up. And my mom will call me and be like, "What are you doing?" I'm working, mother. What are you doing? Like, this is what I normally do. But because you're working from home, it's like not real work to people in your life sometimes. And so you're really gonna have to remind them and create boundaries and create strategies and communicate to let them know so you can continue to be productive. It's also really important to leave your desk at the end of the day. It's a very important like mental boundary, or you will sit and you will code all night and your family will never see you and you won't eat and you'll smell bad. So leave your desk at the end of the day, at the end of your office hours. It's also really important to take lunch breaks, get up, do something so you're at least away from your desk and setting boundaries around a healthy work-life balance. Because again, because it's in your home, it's very easy to just station and plant there. I know for me, a lot of times I'll finish up my coding day and maybe like I'll pop open Netflix and just start working at, like stay at my computer desk, like watching Netflix or whatever. Yes, technically I'm not working, but it feels like I'm at my desk and it just, my mental clarity and like energy doesn't get restored, as well as like, let's say I move to my bedroom or my couch or something and then watch Netflix there. So having that boundary between your work zone and your home zone is really, really key. Lunch breaks are good for that, getting out, going for walks, going to the gym, very, very good. So when we talk about explaining these boundaries to family and friends, because again, like you're at home, right? Why can't you just go to the zoo? Why can't you help them move a couch? You need to explain these boundaries, and the best boundary you can start with is a closed door. Some sort of very visual cue that I'm not here right now, like yes, I'm here, but I'm working, so do not disturb me. You need some sort of very visual indication. I've seen people like actually use lights, like almost like a radio on, radio off light, especially if you're dealing with small children who, again, don't kind of have that mental comprehension. But he's behind this door. Why can't he play with me? That kind of thing. So having some sort of visual indicator that's very clear for a child, a spouse, an in-law, whatever, is really, really helpful for boundaries. And when those boundaries are not respected, it can be frustrating. You're busy, you're trying to get work done, and somebody interrupts your workflow. I would recommend coming up with a safe word. And this is a safe word that you say to that person in your life when you really want to bite their head off and be like, leave me the fuck alone, I'm trying to get some work done. Come up with like a safe code word that you can say to them that's not going to make them bristle at your reaction because you're frustrated, but they will kind of clue in and say, oh, that's right, my bad, you're working right now, I'm gonna leave you alone. So that's my little like relationship saver pro tip for some of y'all. As code word for when you want to scream at the person for interrupting you. All right. Strategy number 2 for working remote is avoiding remote traps. There are a lot of traps or things that you can fall into that will keep you from being an effective remote worker. So trap number 1 is not showering. For the love of God, please shower every day. You're gonna feel better, you're gonna be more productive. There's actually a lot of psychology that goes into like why we are more productive when we feel clean. And the people in your life will thank you. So like, I get it, like, you know, maybe you're not on video chat today, maybe you don't have a client call. For the love of God, just like 30-second shower. That's all I ask. It'll make you a lot more effective. Doing chores is also a really big trap. And this is something that you're at home, right? Like, why can't I do loads of laundry? But the problem is you'll be thinking about doing that chore and you'll be interrupting your workflow to go deal with that chore. So you need to kind of maintain boundaries around that and make sure that you're only doing your chores during after office hours. And when I say don't do chores during office hours, that doesn't mean don't do chores at all. So do not go home to your spouse and be like, well, Jennifer said I don't have to do chores because they'll distract me. No, do your share of the workload outside of working hours. End rant. Other problems that you can run into traps are social media, Slack, anything that will distract you, anything that will pull your focus, browsing the Am I the Asshole subreddit. Is anybody else like super addicted to that one right now? Just so good. No? Oh my gosh, go check out Am I the Asshole on Reddit. It's amazing. That's a time waster. Don't do it while you're working remote. But these are things that can be very, very distracting when you're alone at your computer. So I like to call out a couple different tools that you can actually use if you are that person who happens to lose focus. The big thing I really struggle with is maybe like I'll start running unit tests, right? And I know it's gonna take a minute. And so I just absentmindedly, you know, I'll just pop open a new tab because I'm gonna go browse Twitter. This is my favorite extension that I use. It's called Momentum. And anytime I pop open a new browser tab, it's gonna show me this very nice, very picturesque thing, and it allows me to put in my to-dos, and it's like, good afternoon, Jennifer, and I'm like, oh, Momentum, you're right, let me get my shit together, I should not be on Twitter, I should be working right now. So this is just subtle enough of a reminder that it works for me. If you are a little more distractible than me, there are some other tools. Noisely will give you background noises and a lot of like different kind of Pomodoro-esque tools that you can use, but my favorite Pomodoro-esque one is this one called Forest. And this actually allows you to like plant a tree, and it gives you can set your timer. But what happens when you plant your tree is if you go to any of the websites you're not supposed to go to, you kill your tree. Do you want to kill the tree? No, I hope not. I hope not. Don't kill your tree. So that can be a nice little, more intrinsically motivating tool. And then if you're like, nope, fuck the planet, fuck the trees, I don't care, there's Stay Focused, which will literally completely block websites for you for a duration of time. So there are all sorts of great tools that can help you hone your focus, especially while you first start working remote and you're getting into that mindset. So those are great. And by the way, I'll have a link to the slides at the end of this presentation so you can get access to the links for everything I've shown you. All right, strategy number 3, create a productive work environment. Having a good space, a good boundary space, we talked about a little bit already, but having a space that makes you feel productive and makes you want to do work is really, really important. So having a setup that you're comfortable in, having something that is not going to, like a setup that's not going to give you carpal tunnel is really important. I'm a crazy plant lady, so I love my office being filled with plants and light and everything like that. That makes me really productive. So pay attention to yourself, pay attention to the things you like, what you need to create that productive workspace for yourself, and make that happen. Like the Sims aren't wrong, y'all. There's a reason we get grumpy when stuff isn't clean and why the dishes are out. And it's amazing how much my productivity gets boosted when I like clear everything off my desk, especially like when the bills start to pile up and then there's just like stuff I don't want to deal with. As soon as I get through that mess and get it off my desk, productivity boost every time. So maintaining a clean environment is key. You should also look into pimping your office. Make it an environment you love. And I love, there's this whole Twitter thread, and I love that, yeah, her nails are matching her keyboard, because like these awesome keyboards are a big deal now. But it's just this great thread of everybody showing their desk space and setup. So if you're needing some desk spo, I'm gonna coin that term now, like desk sporation, check out this Twitter thread of some of their setups and these really cool mechanical keyboards. Make it a space that you wanna be in, that you wanna be productive in. It's also good to follow a dress code. You can establish what that dress code is. I'm not gonna lie, I'm most days the one on the right because pants are bullshit. But having some sort of dress code for yourself is really, really important. This is gonna depend on your role. There are a lot of days that I have to be client facing, so you know it's business on top, party on the bottom. But having some routine you can adhere to is really, really important. I also am very religious about my workout, so I like to work out about 2 o'clock in the afternoon as long as I don't have any meetings get in the way. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have like my workout gear on that's pretty comfortable. I'll wear that during the day. I'll go do my workout. I'll come home, shower, put on like real grown-up clothes. That's my dress code. That's my pattern. That's my routine that helps me kind of be in my productive remote work mode. It's also good to be a time zone pro if you're working with distributed teams. My company is based out of Central Time in the States where I live, which is really, really convenient, but I travel a lot. And so one of the best things I've learned how to do is add a secondary time zone to my calendar so I can possibly like always see the time zone that I'm working with normally versus wherever I am. Or when I'm on a new client and maybe it's a bit too hard for me to math whatever that jump is, I'll add their time zone. And so that's a really easy way that you could quickly look and not accidentally schedule a meeting for 5 a.m. like I did in New Zealand a couple months ago. That was not a good call. But learning to use tools to deal with time zones will really help your productivity with remote work. All right, strategy number 4. Being visible in the company is something that you may not realize, but this is how you're gonna be successful, because again, you're behind a desk, your butt is not in a seat. There is no physical manifestation of your being. So you need to get comfortable with saying, hey, I'm here. This is the value I'm adding. This is the value I'm adding. And you need to be cognizant and you need to be aware of that and figure out ways to be visible and let them know you're there and being productive. First thing you need to do is you need to take time to get to know their culture. Don't come crashing in and be like, hi, la, 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 the world revolves around me. Understand the culture, understand the people and the way they interact and how you can fit in and do culture add. So be aware of that, and then you can start some of these other strategies. I want to make sure to check in with your team. If you have stand-up for whatever you're working on, this is going to be a lot easier. But it's also worth just like checking in with your coworkers. Hey, I heard about that thing you were working on. Did you get that figured out? Or, oh, I saw this blog post from you on Twitter. That was really great. Start building that rapport, communicating with your team, getting to know them, letting them know that you exist. You also need to be cognizant to make others aware of your progress, and you need to be much more verbal and much more active about this in a remote environment. If you are running into an issue, you know something's going to be running behind, make sure you're pushing that information out. Don't assume that they're going to check the status on a ticket and think they have all the information. Advocate for yourself, be vocal about what's going on with you, and nobody's going to get upset because everybody's on the same page. It's also a good idea to let people know when you're going to be away from your keyboard or unreachable. So Slack statuses are really good for that. A lot of times, like at least Google Calendar, you can set working hours and you can block things off, put things on your calendar. If you've got a doctor appointment or something like poke blockers, communicate when you are around and when you're not around. Basically, you want to really focus on being transparent. You want to make it very easy for other people to know that you're there, what you're working on, and what's going on with the work that you need to be delivering. Then find ways to contribute to team culture. This is our Slack channel that we have in the States in what we call the Midwest. Where like we would just go on this kick where we would just react with unicorns to create like Fibonacci sequences and just like goofy like culture shit. Like have fun. It's okay to like bring your personality and find, you know, good ways to interact with your team in a remote environment. Fibonacci corn is an entertaining way to go. All right, strategy number 5. And this one is gonna play more for the extroverts, but with working remote, you can get really, really isolated if you're not leaving your house, if you're not getting out. And so it can be really important to have ties to the local area you're living in. And so getting involved with the local tech community is a really, really easy way to do that. Guess what? You're already a really good part of the way there because you're at this conference. You are in the tech community with other human beings in the same room and everybody's wearing pants, yay. Slack is another good way to find local communities. This is actually a list of like geographically centralized community Slacks for all sorts of different areas. So if you're looking to meet people or maybe new to an area or something like that, would encourage you to check out that list of Slacks. A lot of times Slacks will actually be posting about local events, all sorts of stuff. You can also find user groups. Is everybody aware of meetup.com? Yeah, so, you know, hop on Meetup, plug in your code, figure out what events are going on, connect with those around you, get out of your house. We do need a little bit of human connection from time to time. Heaven forbid if you can't find a Meetup, start your own. I've got another whole talk on that. You can find it on YouTube somewhere. But find your community, find your people outside of your home office. You can also take co-working days. There are a couple spaces in London that I looked up. There's a place called Makerversity. There's a place called Central Working at Bloomsbury. If you need that in-office environment, it doesn't need to be all the time. Maybe it's just like a day a week, or maybe a bunch of people are working remote from that location and then going out for beers later. This is a really great remote strategy. There are a ton of spaces worldwide. WeWork, not that I like the company, but they are a co-working space. You've got CoPass, co-working resources, so all sorts of office environments that you can go into. You can do a day pass, something like that, to get out of your remote bubble if needed. You can also look at finding mentoring opportunities. I'm a big fan of Coder Dojo. Coder Dojo is a global nonprofit founded in Ireland to teach kids how to code, but it's a really, really good way to connect with your community, get excited, talk about code with kids. Especially if you're actually missing that back and forth, that pair programming, that feedback, getting involved with some sort of activity like this can be a lot of fun and a good way to get you out of your remote working rut. Also be sure to check out local conferences. Obviously, NDC runs a lot of great events. In March, there's going to be a conference here called RxJS Live. In May, there's going to be the SDD conference. So all sorts of local ways for you to engage and get out and make sure you're spending time with people outside of your desk. Okay, so we've got our strategies. Let's talk about transitioning to a remote job. And there's really only a couple things to worry about. If you want to start with your current company and say, hey, I want to start working remote, start small. Ask them for maybe a day or two a week, because you're going to have to prove to them that you're going to be able to make this work and be just as effective as you were in the office. So you're going to have a little bit of work to do, but that can be a really good way if you really like your current company, you just want to spend more time at home. If you want to go out and find a completely remote job, find some place that works remote, you can use one of these websites. We Work Remotely is actually how I got my current job. And I'm actually hiring on my Angular team right now. So if you're interested in working remote and want to do some Angular consulting and solve some cool stuff, we've got our job postings there. But all of these are largely remote first companies. So really great resources for you to look for a remote job. When it comes to interviewing, you're going to get asked a couple different questions. People are going to want to know, especially if you've never worked remote before, why you think you're going to be successful. And you can be like, well, I saw Jennifer's talk, and I'm like a pro and ready for this now. But you need to know that they're going to ask you questions about your personality. Are you going to be effective remote? Are you going to be able to communicate? Are these things going to work for you? Because they've probably had people in the past that were not successful in a remote environment. So don't be thrown if you get a question around this. Be thinking about it. Be aware of how you're going to advocate for yourself and say why you would make a good remote employee. Finally, a piece of advice I'd like to give. If you just want to go remote because you hate your coworkers, it's not going to make it better. I'm sorry, you're going to need to find a different job. And I actually know at least one person who thought this would solve their issue, and it did not. If you hate your coworkers, working remote is not going to change that problem. It might actually exacerbate it. So that is not a good reason for going remote. A couple additional resources, book here, Remote Office Not Required, as well as Working Remotely, which is a free ebook. So if you're interested in reading, figuring out more, reading about companies who've done like really good remote work and remote strategies, I would recommend both of those. So this is the slide to take a photo of. These are where my slides are hosted. If you liked my pre-talk jams, that playlist is linked on Spotify. But if you have any questions, I'd love for you to come up and talk to me afterwards. Otherwise, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, you wonderful human beings.